All right, guys. So yesterday, President Trump got up on stage with wanted fugitive war criminal and Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and not only doubled down on his demand that Gaza be totally ethnically cleansed of its Palestinian population, shipping them off to surrounding countries to live in perpetual refugee status. And by the way, as a side note, much of the population of Gaza is either directly or they are the descendants of people who were made refugees by the 1948 Nakba. But on top of that plan, he added on that the United States of America is going to apparently be directly taking over and will own the Gaza Strip. So let's go ahead and jump into this first clip here, man. We got a ton of different shit lined up here that I got to get to. So here's Trump standing next to Netanyahu.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
Okay, so number of different things in that first clip. Number one, what does he mean by it will supply jobs to the people of the area? Who are the people of the area? Because you're certainly not talking about Palestinians, right? You're talking about permanently resettling them. So you're not talking about them. Who are you referring to there? We'll get to more of that here in a second. Secondly, he starts off the clip by saying that the only reason Palestinians in Gaza would want to return to their homes is because they have nowhere else to go. So it's not because this is their land, that this is where they've lived their lives. It's because they have nowhere else to go. How does that make any sense? On top of that, as I said yesterday in my video, who turned Gaza into a quote-unquote demolition site? It was the man standing next to you, Benjamin Netanyahu, combined with Joe Biden. Those were the two primary suspects in creating this demolition site. So to turn around and to pretend as if this is some sort of like a humanitarian vision that you have for Palestinians. Oh, it's too dangerous for them to be there right now. Who created the danger? You did. The United States of America did. Israel did. And now they're using that as a backwards justification for a full-blown ethnic cleansing. Another quick thing on that before we move on to the next clip. How exactly do you square in your mind that it's simultaneously not a genocide, meaning the destruction of an entire people, but also Gaza has been rendered into a demolition site that's totally uninhabitable? How do you square those two things in your mind? I mean, in further clips, he goes on to say there's not a building left standing. Hang on a sec. I thought this was a targeted war against Hamas and that Israel was doing everything in their power to avoid civilian casualties. How do you square those two things? Now, second clip here, we have him referencing where he plans to send the Palestinian population. So let's go ahead and watch this one.
Not Jordan, Egypt, what other countries you think might accept Palestinians from Gaza?
Well, I think Jordan and Egypt will. I know they've spoken about it with you, and they say they're not going to accept. I say they will. But I think other countries will accept also. I think that Gaza maybe is a demolition site right now. If you look at Gaza, there's hardly a building standing, and the ones that are going to collapse. You can't live in Gaza right now, and I think we need another location. I think it should be a location that's going to make people happy. You look over the decades, it's all death in Gaza. This has been happening for years. It's all death. If we can get a beautiful area to resettle people permanently in nice homes and where they can be happy and not be shot, not be killed, not be knifed to death like what's happening in Gaza. And right,
who's doing the shooting? Who's doing the killing in Gaza right now? It's the guy sitting right next to you. What are we talking about here, guys? Now, in terms of the move them to Jordan and Egypt point, Trump says, well, The leaders of those countries are saying they don't want that to happen, but I think they'll come around, basically. No, they won't. No, they won't. Both of these countries believe that their existence as a government in power would be jeopardized, would be probably destroyed if this were to happen, right? For a number of different reasons, both because their own populations don't want it to happen, and because taking in close to 2 million people in this kind of a way is not feasible for them to be able to handle. So it's just, it's an existential crisis for those countries, and he's talking about it as if he's negotiating like tax policy or something like that, not to mention the immorality of it. Now, we continue. There's more. Here we have Trump sitting next to this grinning psychopath, insisting he wants peace. He's just so desperate for peace.
He's demanding a Palestinian state?
No, they're not. No.
Are they demanding a path towards a Palestinian state or any other recognition
Everybody's
of that
demanding one thing. You know what it is? Peace. We want peace. We want people to stop being killed. But everybody's demanding one thing. Very simple, peace. And he wants peace also.
Okay, obviously, incredibly ironic to say that the guy who's been trying to get himself into wars with every single country surrounding him, whether it's with Hezbollah in Lebanon, or whether it's the genocide in Gaza, or the continued escalation in the West Bank, or posturing towards Iran, or the back and forth with Yemen, incredibly ironic to say that this guy, of all people, wants peace. No, he doesn't. He wants the opposite of that. Also notice that Benjamin Netanyahu, outwardly laughed when the reporter mentioned a Palestinian state. Now, we know Trump, given his appointments, given his previous policy, given his rhetoric, that he's not in favor of even a two-state solution, let alone a one-state solution where everybody has full democratic and civil rights. So him and Netanyahu are both now openly, as a matter of official U.S. policy, in favor of Israel fully annexing the remaining Palestinian fragmented territory and expelling the Palestinian population. That's now official U.S. state policy out in the open, which it kind of always was anyways in terms of letting Israel push forward on that same pathway and trajectory, but now it's out in the open, essentially. He wants peace also, really. Now, we move on. We also have a reporter here asking an interesting question. How many people do you think need to leave Gaza? And Trump's response to this was, again, very interesting.
How many people are you thinking about?
All of them. I mean, we're talking
All of
about
the
probably 1.7 million people, 1.7 million, maybe 1.8 million. But I think all of them. I think they'll be resettled in areas where they can live a beautiful life and not be worried about dying every day.
So, if you notice there, guys, he says all of them will need to be expelled. And he says that's about 1.7, 1.8 million people. Guys, the pre-October 7th population of Gaza was estimated to be about 2.3 million people. So either he's just wrong about his numbers and he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, or this is an admission that the death toll in Gaza is not what has been reported. That it's not the 40 to now the recently updated 60,000 number, but it's much higher than that. In fact, it's hundreds of thousands higher than that. Now, usually in, this kind of a scenario, you would have excess deaths that aren't accounted for, right? And you have indirect deaths that aren't somebody necessarily being directly bombed, but you have people dying from malnutrition. You have people dying from untreated medical situations, things like that. So it's not shocking or surprising at all that the death toll in Gaza is not the official number. We've reported extensively on this channel, right? That's not unexpected, but he's just sort of coming out and saying that upwards of close to 500, 600,000 people may have been killed as a result of the last year and a half of this genocide. Now, another clip here, we have Trump following through on what exactly does this look like? What specifically do you mean by a U.S. takeover and ownership of Gaza, right? Because, Israel has been doing this year and a half long genocide. They've been taking casualties of their own soldiers along the way, and they still haven't removed Hamas from power, right? So, and they also haven't succeeded in pushing the Palestinian population out of Gaza, which is something I think they've wanted to do for a very long time. So how exactly are you going to do this? As if like the Palestinian population is just gonna, oh, we're just gonna pack our bags and just willingly go off to other countries. Are you gonna send U.S. troops in there? What is that going to look like? Here he answers that.
Go ahead.
Mr. President, can a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia be achieved without the acknowledgement of a Palestinian state? That question for you too, Mr. Prime Minister. And Mr. President, given what you've said about Gaza, did the U.S. send troops to help secure the security vacuum?
So Saudi Arabia is going to be very helpful, and they have been very helpful. They want peace in the Middle East. It's very simple. We know their leader and their leaders very well. They're wonderful people, and they want peace in the Middle East. As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. We're going to take over that piece, and we're going to develop it, create thousands and thousands of jobs.
So he says, if necessary, we will be sending U.S. troops to Gaza. Again, a lot of unanswered questions here. Don't know how or what this is going to look like, why you think the U.S. is going to be successful in doing this kind of thing. Are you just trying to drag us into another war in the region, which is another angle of this? Do you really believe that you're going to be able to successfully not only completely eradicate Hamas and push the population out to surrounding countries, but that's not going to set off further escalation in the region? Like, this is how you get us into a massive, widespread regional war, by sending U.S. troops to expel the Palestinian population from Gaza. He doesn't seem to have any real answer to this. I mean, is this all just bullshit blustering and posturing here? What are we actually talking about? And on top of that, in terms of the Palestinian statehood and the Saudi angle of that, the Saudis actually went out of their way in the middle of the night in Saudi Arabia at 4 a.m., and they found it necessary to put this statement out, as pointed out here by Asaf. Saudi Arabia rules out relations with Israel without the establishment of a Palestinian state. So, I mean, if you guys remember, one of Trump's self-touted biggest accomplishments was the Abraham Accords. And remember, by helping to, sweep Palestinians under the rug, you can make a very strong case that as a part of that deal and ignoring the Palestinian issue, that led to October 7th, as Hamas was sort of lashing out as a way to grab global attention. So he pushed forward with the Abraham Accords last time to try to have Israel normalize their relationship with surrounding countries. And now you have many of these countries coming out and saying, no, that's not going to happen without a recognition of a Palestinian state. And according to Trump and according to his appointments and according to Netanyahu and the Israeli government, Palestinian state not happening. So any sort of like peace deal that Trump thinks is on the horizon, it doesn't seem like that's the case. I mean, it's possible that the Saudis just completely turn back on that and fold, or, turn their back entirely on Palestinians. But, again, what sort of energy are you waking up in the region by doing this? Now, we also have here him being pressed by Caitlin Collins of CNN on where exactly he's suggesting that they go, and also who's going to live there afterwards. And it gets even more vague and inexplicable from here.
Up on what you were saying about the Gazans leaving Gaza, going to other countries. One, where exactly are you suggesting that they should go? And two, are you saying they should return after it's rebuilt? And if not, who do you envision living there?
I envision people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there.
The people of the world. So he sort of slipped in there like Palestinians will live it, but also all of these other people, representatives from all around the world. So we're going to create like an international zone for citizens from anywhere to go and live. What the fuck are we talking about? It's like he's just making shit up on the fly. And that's kind of probably exactly what he's actually doing here. Now, the world's people, man. I mean, come on. Now, we also have another reporter chiming in here, asking about his authority to take over what is not his territory, what is not Israeli territory, and what is recognized under international law as an illegally occupied territory and peoples. So what authority do you have to, send the U.S. off to war in Gaza, Trump?
Mr. Prime Minister, you are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there, redevelopment? And Mr. Prime Minister, do you see this idea as a way to expand the boundaries of Israel and to have a longer peace, even though the Israeli people know how important that land is to you and your citizens, just as the space is inherited by the Palestinians as well?
Okay, what the fuck was that, the wording on that question? The land is important to your people, and it's also inherited by the Palestinians. What are we talking about, guys? This is how you know it's a top U.S. ally and a settler colonial project, because of the kind of doublespeak that they feel necessary to describe what's actually happening. It's an ethnic cleansing. It's been an ethnic cleansing for decades and decades and decades at this point. It's not mysterious. It's not difficult to understand what a settler colonial project in the modern day looks like. We're witnessing it right now. So it was a good question in the first part where she's saying, well, is this an opportunity for Israel to expand their borders? But then she immediately follows that up by saying, to enhance peace? You think Israel violently expanding their borders and ethnically cleansing people is going to enhance peace? Okay, I don't know. Just a bizarre question, but let's hear Trump's response.
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent in a really magnificent area that nobody would know. Nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and...
So again, long-term ownership position for the United States of America in Gaza. And you're seeing a little bit of Trump's real estate side come out of him here, because wouldn't be shocking at this point if Trump is trying to plan for some sort of a Trump hotel on the beaches of Gaza. I mean, that's, people were almost treating that as sort of like a joke a couple of weeks ago. It's not a joke. He might actually do that. And we heard Jared Kushner, by the way, the same guy who was trying to push forward with the Abraham Accords under his last administration and then got $2 billion from the Saudis on the way out. We heard a couple months ago, Jared Kushner saying the same shit about how beautiful Gaza's land is and how, there could potentially be amazing real estate there. I mean, it's really not an exaggeration. He's saying here that he's been thinking about this for a long time, that we're going to have a permanent long-term ownership stake. The Palestinian population is not going to be coming back, and we're going to develop it and make it beautiful and create jobs. It's full-blown imperialism that we're talking about here. And this, is coming in tandem with Trump's sort of imperialist expansion elsewhere as well, with Greenland and the Panama Canal and a whole bunch of other situations. So there you go. This is the Trump administration right now, guys. Of course, we got to get our input from Israel's most loyal foot soldier here, John Fetterman, who said that President Trump's remarks were provocative, but that he would support a potential American occupation of the Gaza Strip. John Fetterman, everybody. We also have, finishing off here, I mean, this is a separate conversation. Let me pause on this for a second. But just to wrap up, what's actually happening here, guys? None of this was unpredictable, right? We understand who Trump is. We understand he took $100 million from Miriam Adelson to allow Israel to annex the West Bank, and now they're beginning to aggressively push forward in that pathway as well. But this is all shit that has been going on not just for a year and a half of the genocide in Gaza and the entirety of the Biden administration, but also the previous Trump administration and the Obama administration before them and the Bush administration before them and the Clinton administration before them. This has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and the U.S. has always been complicit in it. This is the goal of the Israeli state, is to expand their land, their territory over what they claim the biblical texts give them the right to. That's what this is. It's a settler colonial project that we are witnessing in the modern day. It's not difficult to figure out what it is. You look at the destruction of Gaza, you look at the expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank, it's as clear as day. So none of this was hard to predict, that this was eventually going to become the outcome. Trump just happens to be much more aggressive and open about this kind of a policy. But this has always de facto been U.S. policy. Now, working into this this back and forth here with Max Blumenthal and Simone Sanders, there's this conversation that's happening. I've seen tons of liberal accounts tweeting like this, essentially voter blaming, right? She says, I think now it's very appropriate to reiterate that elections have consequences. This is kind of a tame one relative to some of the others that I've seen aggressively going after people and saying, oh, it's your fault that Trump won because you didn't cheerlead for Kamala, and now we're in this horrible situation for Palestinians, right? So it's your fault, not the fault of the politicians. Guys, as pointed out here by Max Blumenthal, he says, I think it's very appropriate to reiterate that Democratic leadership enthusiastically joined with Republicans to authorize the shipping of over 85,000 tons of bombs to Israel to drop on the besieged Gaza Strip. And the point here again is simple. Guys, if you ever find yourself blaming voters instead of blaming politicians, especially in a situation like this, for their failures, then you've completely lost the plot. Not only is it nonsense when you're talking about an issue like genocide, right? We're not talking about, oh, some people didn't like Kamala's housing plan or her healthcare plan or tax plan or whatever the case may be, even though I do have disagreements with her on that. We're talking about genocide. Okay, we're talking about one of the greatest crimes against humanity that has been committed in the modern era. This is not an issue to just cast aside as if it's unfair for voters to have concerns about supporting somebody who has been fully complicit in that, even if we understand that Trump may actually be marginally worse. But at that point, we're splitting hairs trying to lecture and scold voters over genocide with some finger wagging, oh no, we don't like that, here's another couple $1 billion in weaponry, versus proud genocide, which is the Trump-style genocide. We're splitting hairs between the reality on the ground being essentially the same. Gaza is completely obliterated. It's been rendered uninhabitable. Biden, Kamala, had an opportunity, both on the campaign trail and before that as well, to change policy to not just a more moral policy or a policy that follows U.S. law or a policy that follows international law, but also a policy that would have been electorally beneficial. That's what you guys, if you rewind the tape, heard me talking about during the 2024 election, was trying to push Democrats to adopt not only a more humane and moral policy and legal policy, but a better strategy politically and electorally. They chose not to do that. And now we have people, instead of going after these genocidal monsters, these politicians, they're going after, oh, you voted for Jill Stein. It's your fault that Palestinians are being ethnically cleansed from Gaza. No, we're not going to whitewash what Biden did over the last year and a half of his presidency. We're not going to whitewash that. We all witnessed it. Biden set up Trump for this kind of a policy. The reason that Trump can sit there and say that Gaza is a demolition site is because of what Joe Biden and Kamala did. And even after Joe Biden dropped out, if you want to say, oh, Kamala was just the vice president, she couldn't really do anything. Even after he dropped out, she was asked repeatedly, time and time again, would you do anything different? Would you withhold weapons from Israel? Would you force through using U.S. leverage a ceasefire? She chose not to do that. Surface level, oh, I'm in favor of a ceasefire. How are you going to enforce it? Because Joe Biden was saying the same thing for a year. So, I mean, this whole conversation to me is just nonsense. Politicians earn votes, okay? It's not on voters' shoulders that Trump won. It's on Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Democratic Party failures. Not only, again, failures morally, but also failures politically. They chose to do this. And so that's sort of how we ended up in this situation in the first place. So that's all I'll say about that. Absolutely horrifying and deranged shit. I mean, this is your anti-war president here for you. As I said during the 2024 race, anybody who believes that Trump is anti-war is delusional at this point. They're delusional. And they were. Because now he's talking about sending off U.S. troops to potentially go fight and die to conquer Gaza for the American empire. That's where we're at right now, guys.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe Believe me. Everyone is saying